What's good, guys? This is Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow. Over just 2 weeks in March 2026, law enforcement from New York to Alabama to Missouri has delivered 4 hammer blows that have ripped the mask off the entire drug trade. And these aren't cherry-picked headlines. These are detailed federal and local operations that exposed everything from a full-scale Fetty packaging factory hidden in a family apartment building to a cross-state ice pipeline using storage units as warehouses to a armed dealer whose poison killed a 12-year-old boy sleeping under the same roof, to a pediatrician who spent nearly a decade trading deadly prescriptions for sex acts, nude photos, and cash from the very patients he was supposed to protect. Many of them kids that he treated since they were toddlers. And we're going long on every single one of these cases. And today, every piece of evidence, every quote, from the agents and prosecutors who took these guys down, every heartbreaking detail that shows exactly how the game destroys lives at every level. No summaries, no shortcuts. This is raw, unfiltered reality of what fire looks like when it finally catches up. So let's begin in the High Bridge section of Brooklyn. On March 12, 2026, DEA Task Force Group T22, working hand in hand with NYPD, it executes a court-authorized search warrant at 1311 Merriam Avenue, apartment D2, a 6-story residential building where working families raise kids, grandmothers sit on stoops, and life is supposed to feel normal. Instead, agents walk straight into an active Fetty and H packaging mill, running a full tilt inside someone's living space. They seize 3 full keys of Fetty. That's more than 6 pounds of pure poison, with the street value topping $500,000. And the apartment is covered in it. Lines of powder on the table, thousands of stamped glassine envelopes scattered across the floor, and overflowing from an orange bucket. Some already bundled and ready to go for street sale, others empty and waiting to be filled. Grinders packed with residue, a paper shredder topped with loose bags of powder, a suitcase stuffed with custom stamps and ink pads so they could brand every dose like it was a product drop. And, the image that still stops people cold, a baby bouncer seat sitting right there in the living room with a bag of pre-packaged Fetty glassines tucked inside it like it was just another toy or blanket. And as the team breaches, chaos erupts. Wanny Castillo-Sanchez and Carlos Garcia bolt for the living room window and scramble onto the fire escape. Wendelson Hisiano is already halfway up the stairs towards the 5th floor trying to get away. The other 3, Wanley Garcia and Ramon Pina Jimenez and Juan Garcia Villa, are caught cold in the living room and also in the bedroom. The kitchen tells the rest of the story. There's boxes of empty glassines stacked on the table and crammed inside the oven like, they were baking. A cooler hidden in the closet holds another half a key of powder and a kilogram press. The bedroom has a second full packaging table with hundreds more stamped envelopes, plus dresser drawers loaded with over 70 bottles of falsely labeled. It was labeled as xylazine, the veterinary tranquilizer the dealers used to cut to make it hit a little harder but kill faster. The DEA lab tests later proved those bottles were counterfeit garbage. Basically Benadryl and Procaine from Novocaine, plus sheets of fake labels for injectable veterinarian arthritis medication, a tool for crimping bottle caps, and boxes of empty glass bottles ready to be filled. The actual seized powders, though, the Fetty, the H, and the benzodiazepine all mixed together, a triple threat cocktail engineered to hook fast and kill faster. And investigators have been watching them for weeks. Unusual foot traffic at all hours, men carrying bags in and out, garbage bags dumped outside. But these boys are fucked. The building full of, disposable respirators in their trash, along with glassine envelopes with residue that tested positive for Fetty in the NYPD lab. All 6 men, Juan Garcia Villa, Wendelson Haciano, Wanny Castillo Sanchez, and Carlos Garcia, 42. They're all locals from New York. They get charged with criminal possession of a controlled substance in the 1st and 3rd degrees, plus multiple counts of criminally using drug paraphernalia. Arraignments happen fast, and bail set between $25,000 and $100,000 for most. One is held without grand jury action already filed for Supreme Court dates. And DEA Special Agent in charge, Christopher Roberts, called it exactly what it was. Another Fetty packaging and bottling operation extradited from a hard-working Bronx neighborhood where traffickers have shown zero regard for the families living, right next door. Special Narcotics Prosecutor Bridget Brennan noted the Bronx has become a prime spot for these high-volume mills and pledged to keep rooting them out. Bronx DA Darcel Clark, NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch, and State Police Superintendent Stephen James all hammered the same point, that this poison has devastated the borough for far too long, and every mill shut down sends a clear message that the game is basically over. That's the street level factory side of it. Now move south to Montgomery, Alabama. On March 24th, 2026, U.S. District Judge hands down 38-year-old Loretta Deshawn Dawkins of Dothan a sentence that should echo across every interstate. 360 months, 34 years in federal prison with no parole possible. After he serves every single day of that, 5 more years of supervised release once he comes home. Still waiting. The case started back in July 2024 when Houston County investigators spotted a suspicious package activity tied to Dawkins. He was receiving shipments of ice, shipped from out of state, then warehousing it in a storage unit. In Dothan, agents executed a search warrant on that unit and found 2 boxes holding approximately 5 pounds of ice plus 3 bags of marijuana. A second warrant at his residence uncovers documents, keys, and other items linking him directly to the stash. December 2025, a jury convicts him, and on March 24th, the judge locks it in. Acting U.S. Attorney Kevin Davidson said drug traffickers who bring this poison into communities will be identified, investigated, and prosecuted without mercy. DEA Special Agent in charge Stephen L. Hoffer made it crystal clear that 30 years without parole is the definitive message to anyone who thinks Alabama is just a convenient hub. Working shoulder to shoulder with, the Dothan and Eufaula police, they intercepted the load before it could hit more streets and destroy more lives. Whether, it's shipped across state lines or hidden in a local storage unit, they will find it and make sure that the full weight of federal justice lands. ICE tears through southern communities like wildfire. Families are shattered, hospitals swamped, crime spikes, and kids left without parents. I know firsthand. 5 pounds might look like small potatoes to someone moving weight, but in federal court, it buys you basically a lifetime behind bars. Third case, back in the Bronx on March 25th, 2026, federal authorities unseal an indictment and yank a man named Buddha straight out of New York State custody, where he was already serving time on a separate firearm and drug charges. He's now staring down federal counts that could keep him locked up for the rest of his life. And this is a serious case, y'all. The indictment charges a 34-year-old Bronx man with conspiracy to distribute narcotics resulting in death and distribution of narcotics resulting in death, both carrying mandatory minimums of 20 years and maximums of life. Plus, using, carrying, and possessing firearms in connection with the trafficking. Another 5 to life count. From at least November 2017 through January 2024, Cabrera and his co-conspirators moved H, Fetty, and Pero Flucho Fetty across the Bronx. He sold large quantities straight to undercover officers. In one covert video recording, he's selling nearly $2,000 worth of Fetty Lace H and openly bragging about jacking up pill prices because it's a fucking opioid epidemic out here. At his peak, he was clearing up to $10,000 a week, but the case turned, nightmarish. On June 28, 2022, a 12-year-old boy that was living in the same apartment as Cabrera is exposed to Fetty and Paraflutro Fetty that Cabrera kept there. The child dies from the poisoning. Cabrera had significant quantities of drugs stored right in the apartment, including inside a safe in the closet just outside the bedroom. The boy shared with at least one sibling. Inside that same safe were 2 guns, more drugs, more pills, and they were kept in bags in the primary bedroom. The very next morning, after the boy had been rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead, Cabrera wasn't grieving. He was texting another associate, frantically checking to make sure that one of his drug bags wasn't missing. To make sure that nothing is missing. Even after that, he kept right on selling throughout New York, including while sitting in state custody on the other charges. The DA New York Enforcement Division Special Agent in charge, Ferreira Islam, called it the deadly hallmark of these organizations: weapons, drugs, and violence that claimed an innocent child. U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton also said that Cabrera pumped poison into the Bronx for years. The havoc reached, his own doorstep with the death of a vulnerable 12-year-old boy in his own home. And, still he kept dealing, Fetty kills, it kills children. And if you deal Fetty, you are dealing death. That's just what it is. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisk, same one in the other case, added that Cabrera showed a, colossal disregard for human life by selling in a home where a child was present. And this one shows how the poison doesn't stay on the corner, that it walks through the front door and sits steps away from where kid sleeps. The final case in St. Louis In federal court just days ago, U.S. District Judge John A. Ross sentences a former pediatrician, Craig A. Spiegel, now 70 years old, to 20 years in federal prison. From at least 2014 through May 2023, Spiegel used his white coat and medical license as a weapon against at least 19 of his own patients, many of whom he had been treating since they were very small children. He traded prescriptions for pain pills and other controlled substances in exchange for cash, sexual acts, or nude photos of these children. Instead of referring people struggling with addiction to real treatment, he deliberately fed their disease with dangerous combinations of addictive drugs to keep them dependent and coming back. He pressured, reluctant patients through harassing text messages, and in at least one case turned sexually violent. One victim was only 7 or 8 years old when this happened, when Spiegel first met her as a patient years later, while, she was going through a divorce, and at her lowest, he preyed on that vulnerability and initiated sexual contact. He admitted to prescribing to his co-defendant, April Bingham, in exchange for sexual favors, fully knowing that she was addicted and selling some of the pills on the street. He even used the names of friends and relatives to bill insurance so that he could keep the scheme rolling without raising any type of red flags. Bingham introduced him to more people willing to pay or perform sexual acts for the drugs. The whole thing only unraveled because of the Bridgeton Police Department opened an investigation after his indictment. Spiegel lied under oath in federal court, claiming that he never signed a consent form for a cell phone search until after investigators had already pulled the data. He pleaded guilty in December to illegal distribution of controlled substances, making false statements related to healthcare matters, and conspiracy to distribute Medicare, Missouri Medicaid, and Illinois Medicaid lost $114,000 to his illegal prescriptions, money the judge ordered him to pay back in his restitution. Bingham already pleaded guilty and received a 21 months in 2024. DEA agent Michael Davis said acts like this cannot and will not be tolerated, that a man who took advantage of his position, harmed people who trusted him, and destroyed his own reputation in the process, now faces serious time. FBI Special Agent in Charge Chris Crocker put it bluntly: Spiegel is no better than a street-level dealer. He knowingly exploited addicts to fuel his own sexual gratification and violated every oath that a physician is supposed to live by. HHS Special Agent in Charge Linda T. Hanley called it a deliberate abuse of medical position to prey on vulnerable patients and manipulate federal health care programs. Assistant U.S. Attorneys Amy Sestrick and Jonathan Clow prosecuted it alongside the Brighton PD, the DEA, Homeland Security, and FBI. Missouri Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit also contributed. So we talked about 4 separate operations, 4 corners of the same rotting game. Now let's talk about why every single one of these hit so hard. The opioid crisis isn't, some distant statistic. The next poison in packets, 12-year-olds dying in bedrooms, steps from loaded safes, entire apartment buildings turned into 24-hour factories, and even doctors who swore to heal turning their exam rooms into marketplaces for addiction and abuse. ICE isn't just, Southern trouble, it's highways feeding poisons into towns where families are already struggling. And, when the betrayal comes from inside a pediatrician's office, the damage cuts even deeper than any corner dealer could manage. These cases show that the game doesn't just move product, it invades homes, makes kids orphans, bankrupts people, leaves entire neighborhoods desolate, paying the price for decades. Law enforcement isn't waiting anymore. They're watching foot traffic, testing trash, tracking packages, and flipping co-defendants, running undercover buys and hitting storage units and cell phones, and building cases that follow you from the street into the federal court years later. Multi-agency teams like the DEA and NYPD, state police, and local departments across the U.S., they're all doubling down on this, opioid-free America thing. And every single strike, if you're still in the game at this point, at any level, you're packaging in an apartment, shipping across state lines, slinging after a tragedy, or hiding behind a medical license, hear this loud. This will be you. The surveillance is better, the labs are faster, and the prosecutors are hungrier. And the judges are done with the light sentences in a lot of states. One recorded deal, one text, one storage receipt, one patient who finally talks, and it ends in cuffs on a fire escape or in a courtroom staring down decades, that you'll never get back. Your kids grow up without you, your name becomes another headline, and the streets keep turning while you sit in a cell. Believe me, I know. And now the part nobody in the game wants to admit out there. There is no honor amongst thieves. Look across these 4 cases, it's crystal clear. Cabrera, he keeps checking his drug stash the morning after a 12-year-old dies in his own apartment. No loyalty, to the household. No pause for the child who lived there and lost his life. Just pure self-preservation and greed. Spiegel betrays the very patients who trusted him as their doctor. And, since their childhood, exploiting their addiction and vulnerabilities for sex and cash while knowing that they were selling the pills he fed them. The mill operators in the Bronx stash poison, next to a baby bouncer and try to run out the window. The second agents knock, every man for himself. That's just what it is. Dawkins thinks the storage unit keeps him invisible until the feds connect the dots and his whole operation collapses. In the drug game, the moment the heat turns up, the same people that you call your family or your partners, they flip, they testify, or throw you under the bus to save themselves. There's no code, no loyalty, no honor, just betrayal layered on top of betrayal until everyone ends up in the same courtroom or the same grave. These communities are being absolutely decimated. And in the Bronx, high volume mills like the one we talked about on Merriam Avenue don't just sell death, they manufacture it right next to the playgrounds and school buses. And, kids grow up in these communities, breathing the same air as, and the families that lost their sons and daughters to overdoses every single week. And it's a sad cycle that repeats. One hit, one funeral, another generation hooked, before they're old enough to even drive. In Dothan, Alabama, the ICE, coming in from out of state turns stable neighborhoods into hubs of addiction, crime, and lost futures. Parents in jail, kids in foster care, hospitals overwhelmed. In St. Louis, we saw a trusted pediatrician just preying on people for years, leaving behind nothing but trauma and broken lives and overdoses. Families that will never trust the medical system again. And, it doesn't stop at those cities. I've got to make this personal for a second. My name is Christian Whitlow, and, I'm coming to you from Roanoke, Virginia, right here, in my part of the state. Our area has been slammed harder than most people realize. Virginia has lost thousands of people to this epidemic. Fetty is behind the overwhelming majority of overdose deaths year after year. It's the leading cause of unnatural death in the Commonwealth. Families I know personally, people in my former circle have buried loved ones because one pill looked real but was laced. My own aunt, that economic toll alone has cost Virginians billions. Lost wages, medical bills, incarceration. The ripple effect all adds up on businesses, schools, and in rural parts of the states, and even the suburban spots have seen, youth overdoses climbing. I've watched friends, kids get pulled into it, families torn apart, communities that used to feel safe now holding candlelight vigils, often, and this isn't abstract for me. This is the fire I see burning in my own backyard. And it's why I do this show. Because, the same poison that, hits all these places across the country is showing up in parking lots and school bathrooms near you. No community is immune or safe. The drug game, it promises money and street respect, but it delivers betrayal, prison, funerals, and, neighborhoods turned into ghost towns. These 4 cases, from March 2026 prove the fire is everywhere. And, it's winning. But I think that's all for this one, you guys. If you're interested in being a guest or me being a guest on yours, as always, my email will be in the description. I'll have some more breakdowns coming for y'all this weekend. If you've made it to this point in the video, I'm so thankful you're here. Thank you for supporting me. Please hit that like and subscribe button. And, if any of these cases hit home for you, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear about it. I want to hear from y'all. I'm happy y'all are here. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.